there's this new this survey that came out from Nationwide Insurance. They talked to a bunch of drivers out there, and the sentiment out there, people just feel like the roads are worse. They feel like things are more reckless, drivers are more aggressive, that sort of thing. And for a lot of these parents, they've got to send kids out here to drive in this climate. Before we get to all of that, let me ask you this. Are you surprised when you hear people are alarmed and just feel more unsafe now than ever before?
No, no. If you look at, like the Des Moines metro area, we've got the same amount of roads, but we're getting more and more people moving to the area. If you look at statistics, people drive farther now to and from work than they ever have. So people are on the roads longer, and all those things together. Everybody's busy, has kids, they have places to go, and so all those things combined just make for an atmosphere that if people aren't careful and they're not being proactive, it can definitely get dangerous in a hurry.
Yeah, it's easy for people to forget. You go out here, you're operating thousands of pounds of machinery. This is a very, very sensitive vehicle that we're operating. For those parents, well, actually for anybody who's stepping behind the wheel, you have people coming in doing this all the time. What are some things that you do to make sure that we stay as safe as possible anytime we get out there on the road?
Right. So, one thing that we talk about a lot, from the very beginning with our student drivers in the class, in the car, a lot of it comes down to perspective. You got to understand that you are driving, a deadly weapon, right? So, there's not a lot of room for error sometimes, especially again in the Des Moines metro area where there's always cars. It's usually always busy. So there's a lot more risk involved there, and so just getting the perspective that, this is dangerous. We do have, an average of one fatality a day in Iowa. Usually there's, a crash every few minutes. There's a crash with injury every 20 or so minutes. And people think, well, I wasn't in a crash yesterday. I wasn't in a crash last week, so I probably won't be in a crash today. And just getting that perspective that every day is a different day, and they've got to be on their toes and be as aware as possible, and just have that perspective, right? So, if we're awake for 16 hours a day, that 15-minute trip across town is 1% of our day, right? So for 1% of the day, can we give it, everything we've got, our best attention, our best effort?
On that trip that you take, though, there can be all kinds of crazy things that happen. Someone runs a red light, someone's on their phone, distracted driving, all kinds of different things. How can parents make sure that, or better yet, people in general, how can they be sure to practice defensive driving and be looking out for the people around them?
Yeah, defensive driving is huge right now because it's not just about making sure that you're not on your phone and you're not eating or drinking, you're not speeding or following too close. Rear-end collisions are the most common type of crash anywhere for any age group. But it's also about being aware of all the cars around you and trying to anticipate what's going to happen, based on where the cars around you, what their speed is, their lane position, how close are you to an intersection. Most crashes happen at intersections, so just understanding the situation that you're in, might dictate, what your following distance is or what your lane position is or whether you're braking or not. And again, the big part, we think of cell phones as distracted driving, and that's a part of it. But, with teenagers, it's their friends in the car are at least as big, if not bigger hazard than cell phones, right? So, and that goes for adults too, right? So, the three different types of distractions, there's the mental or the cognitive distraction, where we're just thinking about something else, what we've got to get done today. The thing that happened earlier, the argument that we had or whatever, right? So we're not thinking about driving, we're thinking about something else, right? And so we miss our turn, we miss an exit, we miss a speed limit sign. Obviously the distractions that take our eyes off the road, whether it's that big infotainment system in our car, even if we are hands-free. If you look at statistics, hands-free is just a little bit safer than having your phone in your hand, whether it's a phone call or whatever else, right? So don't think that hands-free is completely safe. It's not. It's still a big mental distraction. It can still be a physical distraction where you take your hand off the steering wheel, to touch your infotainment system or your stereo or whatever. And then obviously a visual distraction, right? If you have a passenger in a car and you're looking at your passenger, if obviously you're looking at your phone or just looking at things outside the car that you're not supposed to. So, a big thing about being proactive, and being aware of what people around you are doing is just, constant quick eye movements, right? Checking your intersections, even if you have a green light, even if you don't have a stop sign, check every intersection, keep an eye on every car around you. Somebody might make a lane change without a turn signal. Somebody might run a red light because they're not paying attention, right? So again, it's not about just being as safe as you can, but it's also about watching out for everybody else. If everybody was paying attention, obviously we wouldn't have a problem, but if somebody makes a mistake and the people around them are paying attention, usually they can see that mistake and they can account for it, right? But if we've got somebody not paying attention that makes a mistake and then somebody else that's not paying attention doesn't see them make that mistake, then obviously that's where crashes are a lot more likely to happen.
Now let's say that you've got a student that you get in the car with and you get out there on the road, you're there in the passenger seat. Will you call out, like, do you see what's going on here or whatever, or do you kind of depend on them? What's your method?
Right, so there's a few different ways that we train students. The first one is just the instructor talking through situations. We're driving through a residential neighborhood, so our potential hazards are cars backing out of driveways, kids riding scooters out into the street or chasing a ball out into the street, cars on side streets that might pull out in front of us, right? Parked cars where somebody might open the door and get out, right? So just being aware of what those potential hazards are is a big part of that. And then asking the students questions, okay? So what are our potential hazards? And see if they remember those things. Sign observation is a big one too, right? So if you're driving on a road you're not familiar with and all of a sudden there's a lane closure, right? So, in Iowa there's two seasons, right? There's winter and there's road construction season. So, a road that you're typically used to, now it's reduced down to one lane. There's signs, there's cones. And again, if you're not paying attention, it'd be easy to be in the wrong lane or make a mistake and do something that could increase your risk there. So yeah, just trying to increase their awareness and trying to get students to think, what are my potential hazards? What am I searching and scanning for? Because the sooner you see something, it gives you more time to react, and more time gives you more stopping distance or more potential to change the position of your car to potentially avoid a collision.
I think about when you were talking about just, you've got a lot of, Des Moines is bigger, but also you have, like you mentioned, people from small towns. They're not used to Des Moines traffic, so you've got people who are coming in, just all these different things that could make the roads more dangerous. Have you done anything over the years or had to do anything differently in a way to teach defensive driving a little more differently, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I think defensive driving is something that we've always taught. Obviously every year, as distracted driving becomes a little bit more of an issue, it's something that we have to emphasize more and more. And that's the tough thing with student drivers is, if they come in with not a lot of driving experience, we're trying to work on just basic turning and stopping and, understanding right of way. And so some of those secondary or tertiary skills like searching and scanning and moving your eyes and anticipating what's going to happen, those come a little bit later down the road. And so, it's a balancing act of trying to teach the basic fundamentals, but at the same time, trying to get them to think on their own and trying to anticipate, and be proactive and be defensive, at the same time. And so, it is a little bit of a challenge with the beginning driver to try and do that. On the flip side with adults, they might have the attitude, well, I've been driving for a long time, I know what I'm doing, I can get away with looking at my phone for a few seconds. You know, I can get away with speeding or following too close, you know, because I've done it and I've gotten away with it. But again, every day, the cars around you are different, the driving situation, the weather, road conditions are different, right? So you can't say, well, I didn't get into a crash yesterday and I did this, so I won't get into a crash today, even though I'm still maybe doing some things that aren't the safest. You know, so again, a lot of it comes back to just having the right perspective and the right attitude. You know, again, if you just say, this is 1% of my day, my 15-minute drive that I'm taking right now. So for 1% of my day, I can be completely focused on driving, because I understand that, you know, crashes do happen often, crashes with injuries happen often. You know, everybody's insurance isn't getting cheaper, you know, and that is because, you know, crashes are happening more often, cars are more expensive to fix, right? And so, you know, just saving yourself a little bit of hassle by leaving a few minutes early so you don't have to drive faster, you know, or just having that mindset that I'm going to do everything I can to be as safe as possible, so I don't have to go through the process of, you know, dealing with insurance and getting my car fixed and all those types of things. It's just, you know, like anything else in life, it's just a little bit of being proactive goes a long way, right? An inch of prevention is a pound of cure. So,
And as we wrap up here, for parents out there, because not everyone's going to use Street Smarts, but for our parents out there, what are some things that they can do with their teens as they're getting ready to drive? What are some things that they can be telling them to look out for, and ways that they can help them prepare?
right. So, you know, just in general, you know, like with anything else, practice is everything, right? Even if it's not perfect practice, right? There's no such thing as perfect practice, but getting out there and seeing different driving, there's so many different driving situations, you know, in a bigger city like the Des Moines metro area. So just getting kids to see those different situations over and over again, so when they're driving by themselves, they're not seeing a situation for the first time, right? So, you know, when parents are in the car, or when an instructor is in the car, they can talk students through a situation that maybe they haven't seen, they don't know how to handle. You know, but once they're out there on their own with their school permit or driving to work, you know, if they see a situation they don't know how to handle, they're just going to do the best they can and kind of guess. So, you know, just driving as much as they possibly can. Iowa doesn't require a lot of hours. You know, Iowa requires 20 hours before a student upgrades, you know, to a school permit or an intermediate license at 16. Most states are at least double that. Some states are 50 or 60 hours of practice before they can upgrade and drive by themselves. So, you know, just getting the kids in the seat, you know, whether it's in the residential neighborhood or, you know, streets that aren't very busy. It doesn't have to be, you know, take them to busy streets right away or out on the interstate, but just getting kids behind the wheel and getting their confidence up is a huge part of that. And again, just getting them comfortable with all those different driving situations that they're going to see.